Welcome to another edition of a standalone podcast where we interview only the best of the best. You know, how do you get to be an extraordinary leader? I don't think there is a time in human history where we need to have leadership skills. And so for us, and coming in our presence, I can't think of anyone more exceptional than Mike Sarraille. Let me just break down a couple things that he's been able to knock out. You know, whenever I think that I'm doing well, I always love to interview people, and then I humble myself and say, oh man, I've got a lot to do. So you are a former recon Marine. You were a scout sniper. While you were a Marine, you went to school, you got your MBA. That's exceptional. In 3 years, you're a retired Navy SEAL. You are a founder and CEO of Talent War Group. You write for Men's Journal. You're an expert on leadership and human performance, and you're a best-selling author. And in between all of that, there is so much more that we're going to dive into. But, you know, Mike, I just want to say thank you for being a guest today, where we're going to really talk about what it means to be a warrior. When I got into business, Mike, I developed something called a business warrior, where I knew I had to have a certain mentality to do well in business. And I wanted to talk to you about this. You have your book, The Everyday Warrior, which I highly recommend, because for people that need something to refer to check them, to get them back on the right path, you know, in your book, you talk about, you know, there's things that happen to all of us. Everyone's battling with someone, but we're going to dive into this today and get some help from a qualified professional, which is you. So I first want you to define, what is a warrior? Do you have to go to war to be a warrior? Can a single mother be a warrior? I would love to hear your insight on this.
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth, because that's one of the examples I use, is that I've seen a mom, single mom of two, sacrificing everything to provide a better future for her kids, who has more of a warrior mindset than some of the men and women I served with in the military. And I've got to circle back. I claim to be an expert at nothing. I'm a student of leadership. I'm a student of high performance. I'm a student of culture. And I've barely scraped the surface on my understanding of it. I've just surrounded myself with such amazing people that perform at a higher level than I do, where naturally you either elevate your game, or you'll find that you can't run in those circles anymore. But in the book, I talked about, I think, just by pure psychological reasons, when we say warrior, people think of, you know, the profession of arms. There are warriors in the traditional sense, and I served with them. And let me say this: they're not what you see in the movies. I had the opportunity to serve at a organization known as the National Mission Force, where just unequivocally the most lethal warriors in the world preside. And they are the most kind, empathetic, respectful individuals. People gravitate to them for who they are and what they stand for. And I was one of those people that gravitated towards them. And I learned so much from watching them. And when I wrote the book is not about me. It's about the men and women I served with, both in the business world and in the military. And a warrior has nothing to do with whether you carry a weapon and go to war. It has everything to do with your mindset. And that's why I refer to warriors within their respective professions, because I've met some business leaders on the outside who never served a day in the military. And I'm just like, man, I would follow this man or woman anywhere, because they pour into the people below them. They have grit, they have resiliency, they have this off the charts curiosity. They are kind, they're empathetic, they're respectful. And again, it goes back to, you know, the reason this title came around was, and one of my good friends, he helped me when I was in a dark time, when I exited the military and I felt like I lost a part of my DNA and my tribe. And his book is coming out March 26th, called Operator Syndrome. And he doesn't name me, but he said, one of the guys I helped said, I just don't feel like myself anymore. And I didn't feel like a warrior without being in that traditional warrior culture. And he said, well, why is it any different? And he said, who's the biggest warrior to know? And I said, that's my mom. That, 5'1" and only woman only person who's ever that made me bleed from my nose for good reason, and just a warrior to the core. And my emotional and spiritual foundation came from that woman. And he said, then be an everyday warrior. And so I sort of stole the trademark from him and wrote a book, but he totally gave me the permission. And the book is meant to help people. Here's what I've seen amazing individuals do. There's a lot of reflection in the book. We talk heavily about failure as well.
Yeah. And, there's so much to unpack in your book. I really wanted to start off by saying, so many people are so attracted to the idea of being a success. And you really define it where you say it begins with knowing yourself, finding a tribe, and understanding failure. And I wanted for you to break this down to people because we live in a world where everyone feels like they're already a failure. They don't know what to do. They're comparing themselves to everyone else. Social media is just blowing this out of proportion. But for you and all the things that you've been able to achieve for yourself, you still, I want to say this to everyone. I get the blessing of being able to research people, and I dive deep into people. I read both of your books. I watched videos. And one thing that I will say is you are an exceptional human being, and your energy of humbleness and the confidence that you have that is silent is so impressive, and it's so respectful. And I just want to say that's incredible. And for you to go through failures, for you to know the importance of a tribe, and then knowing yourself. Can we talk about that, especially the knowing yourself part? There's so much work that people have to do. Instead of comparing and taking that energy and pushing it out, like how do we go inside of ourselves and cultivate this warrior mentality?
A good friend of mine with a very successful podcast, Andy Stumpf, his podcast is called Cleared Hot. One of the smartest guys I've ever met. Sorry, you got me tearing up at the humility part, and I'll address that. But he said the most powerful voice in life is the one in your head, both good and bad. And you got to be, it was a cautionary tale of don't always listen to the negativity. I think it's human nature, regardless of where you're at, to compare yourself to others. I mean, we all know the common phrase, comparison is the thief of joy. Mm-hmm. I had a friend who just exited on a company and became a multi-millionaire. And I asked him, I said, well, what are you going to do now? You got more money than God. You can do whatever you want. You can stop working. He's like, I've got friends with more money and I want what they have. And I stepped back from that and I'm like, holy crap. It just never stops. Where the know thyself part, and there's two parts to this. Very few people take the time to reflect and say, where am I at in life? What are my strengths and weaknesses? Where do I want to go? Because you are not the same person you were 6 months ago. You're definitely not the same person you were 5 years ago. You have this thing called experience and hopefully wisdom from every step, both successes and failures that you took along the way. The identifying what your purpose and passion is in life came from a friend named Johnny Kim. You'll love this story. First generation Korean American from LA. Met him in buds. I discounted him because he wasn't didn't have this big physical stature. And I'm like, oh, this kid we went through SEAL training together. I'm like, this kid will quit in a few weeks because he was very soft voiced. And I was wrong, deadly wrong. And I watched him earn, literally on the battlefield, I watched him earn a Silver Star, then a Bronze Star for Valor on the subsequent deployment. The Navy sent him back to get his degree to become an officer. He got a 3.9 in mathematics from USD, went to Harvard Medical School, and then applied for the NASA program, and now he's an astronaut. He did all that by the age of 34. And the most humble guy you'll ever meet. And what people didn't know about him is he had a wildly alcoholic father who was abusive, and he stood up to him finally in his senior year. The cops came, and unfortunately his father had a gun, and the police killed his father. And he still has I think he won't say it, but the guilt of that he was responsible for that. But he said he struggled so many years with what his dad's definition of success was compared to his. And he had to sort of untrain himself to say, no, success is what I want to do. And now he's got kids who I would hate to be one of his children and be like, oh, I've got to become a SEAL, Harvard educated doctor, and an astronaut to hit success. He says, no, I tell them daily that if you want to be a pianist, an artist, a lawyer, that's for you to decide. All I ask is that you pour into that. On the battlefield, the most important piece of information that you need to know is where you're at. Because if you don't know where you're at, you can't get to where you want to go. And so that know thyself is always the first process, the reflection of looking inward and assessing where you're at and doing it on some sort of a cadence, and that's different for other people, so that you're not just going off in some errant direction and wasting effort that's not moving you towards your ultimate goal. And so, yeah, reflection is deep in the book. I mean, we provided reflection questions at the end of each chapter for a reason, is to get people into this habitual nature of, in the military, we call it an after action review, or it's
Right.
to debrief yourself. How did my day go? What did I do well? More importantly, what did I do poorly? Am I closer to my goals? What do I need to do differently? And when you get in that habit, you start to minimize, let's just say, wasted effort, and you really hone in on the things that bring you closer to your goals and happiness in life.
Yeah, in the book, you also talk about balance. I just to be honest with you, Mike, this is one of my least favorite words, because I know that to do well, you have to have a certain, in the Navy SEALs, they talk about violence of action, and in business, you have to have this mindset. And as you read the book, you say that you really can't get balance. And I always tell my team, balance is something that's going to come to you. So if you're seeking it, it's going to like escape you. So can you talk about this? Think about, for people when they're starting to know themselves, when the reason why you have to know yourself is because the stage that you're in might not require balance. And you may be comparing yourself to someone who put in 20 years of work doing something, and now they're working on finding a different layer of themselves. So can you touch on this so people don't get, into this trap of, I'm so aggressive, I need balance, and then they get confused and then they don't execute?
So this is really a nuanced subject, and I've evolved on this subject since I've written the book as well. The example I use was, I eventually hung up my gun belt, as we say, and made the hardest decision to leave my tribe and to leave the military, because I was in the peak of my physical condition. I hate to say it, I'm not a warmonger or a war hawk. I was in a condition to rip heads off, because that's quite frankly, is we had to hunt evil people that did evil things, much like Hamas on October 7th. Those were who we were going after. But I was so out of balance. I was mentally and spiritually bereft, and my performance nosedive. And I did not want to be a detriment to my team. And I felt like I was, even though no one said anything. And I eventually made the decision, because I knew someone younger than me, smarter than me, with more ambition and drive at the time, would come in and do a better job. Balance is different for different people. And imbalance also has positive effects as well. It makes us get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And you've got to push yourself outside your comfort zones, both mentally and physically, as well as spiritually. Because what people don't understand, if you look at SEAL training, it's not just some sadistic events that we put together to put the kids through hell. No, it's designed to push people outside their mental and physical comfort zones, because that's where true character emerges. Subsequently, that's where true learning and growth take place. And what I've seen, and this is my opinion, humble opinion, is our culture has gone to, hey, you need to be really balanced, and there's this work-life balance. And I think we've taken it to the other side of the spectrum where nobody wants to work anymore. But I interviewed Terrell Owens for Men's Journal, and I asked, hey, and you guys a Hall of Famer, hey, how did you achieve balance during your NFL career, which he set records? And he looks at me and says, balance? Balance? Are you freaking kidding me? He's like, when you're achieving greatness or going after ambitious goals, there is no balance. And I'm like, we had already finished the manuscript, and I'm like, oh, he's right. He's right. Because I started reflecting. I'm like, when I was at my last command, my first family, my wife and my kids were really secondary to the mission. And you could call that a lack of balance of what should be normal human priorities, but it's what was required by the job. So you will be unbalanced. Just take those opportunities, even if it's a day, to say, hey, I'm taking a day to myself to reflect. And I'm taking a group of guys to Rhythmia Resort, all high performers. John Wellborn, 10 years in the NFL. Sanjay Ribeiro, who's a world champion Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. A guy named Ramon Colon Lopez, who was the most senior enlisted in the entire U.S. military. And then a guy named Dr. Kirk Parsley, who's a human performance doc. And we're doing ayahuasca, which is way outside of just what we've done before. And Kelly Slater he's like, go. He's like, go do it. Not to be a name dropper. He's on the board. And I interviewed him as well. He's like, it will change your life and it will force you to reflect. And I don't think any of us need it right at this moment, but we're going to take the opportunity to take 6 days, go on this well-run journey, and force ourselves to reflect on, again, where we're at and knowing thyself.
I think that's powerful because you're choosing to do it. And a lot of people, it's like when a crisis happens to them, this is where they have this opportunity to say, okay, I can sit here, I can learn, I can grow in this moment, or I can just be overtaken by it and unravel. So I think when you're conscious and you're making that choice to say like, no, I'm going to do something to force myself to reflect right now when you are doing well, I think that's a beautiful thing to like take yourself to a whole different level. I wanted to ask you, Mike, for a lot of people today, when they're in their 20s, in my business, we do a ton of recruiting and we have, younger people, we have older people, and they're not the same. I don't believe in equality because we are not the same. We're different. That's what makes us, function. But I believe young people are the future. And I believe that great companies will put leadership development programs in place to cultivate great young people. What could you speak on in terms of why it's so important to, and correct me if I'm wrong, to not seek balance when you're young, but to be ultra aggressive at becoming great at something? What could you speak on with this?
Oh, some of my favorite topics. One, when you're young, it's like if you invest, you can be aggressive with your investments, high risk, and is naturally psychology. As we get older, you move your investments to more conservative, investments where you minimize risk. Dude, your 20s, there's no reason to not go hard, and then also party hard. Come on, let's remember we
I'm going to edit that one out.
we worked hard in the Marine Corps and the SEAL teams, and then we would party hard, and I could work off of 4 hours of sleep. I can't do that anymore. Physiologically, things change, but that's your time, and what you do in your 20s will determine if you could say, I'm done at 60, 65, maybe earlier. If you blow those years with just partying and not focusing and not building those core skill sets, you're pushing the work down the road. On the financial side, I've got a good friend, Paul Adaka, who runs one of the top, I think it's 15 private wealth firms, and very Christian based. And he's like, Mike, would you guess by the age of 65, how many people within the United States are prepared to retire? And the number was 4%. And I'm like, that's insane. So that's just from a financial perspective, but you are absolutely right. The next generation is always the best generation. Am I proud of what we did during the global war on terror? I am. And we were the soldiers necessary to do what fit that time. But I'll be the first to tell you that this new generation of SEALs and special operators, doesn't matter what community, and infantry and conventional military, are smarter, stronger, and better than we were. And I hope it's not for me to determine that my legacy was I poured in, and I think I did. I tried every opportunity to pour into the younger generation to make them better than us. That's the whole point of leadership. Yes, to drive outcomes, because if you don't drive outcomes, you're going to be fired really quick. but you're also expected to train the next generation to be better than you. This, and I've nicknamed this the generational game. I ended up in a meeting where I did do one last tour in Austin, Texas at the NROTC unit, where some guys were bagging on the next generation snowflakes and they wear skinny jeans, and it hit me. And it reminded me back to 1998 when I enlisted in the Marine Corps. The Gulf War veterans were I mean, they called us by derogatory names. They said we were weak. And guess what? The Vietnam generation did it to them. And the World War II and Korean era did it to the Vietnam vets. It is the easy psychology. Human psychology is people always default to lazy, the path of least resistance. And it's easy for any leader to be like, this generation is different. Yes, they're different. They grew up with a cell phone in their hand. Guess what? If we had that, we would be the same way. So stop playing the generational game, pour into them. If they communicate differently, guess what? Don't expect them to change their communication style to you. You as a leader have to evolve in order to speak and communicate in a way that they comprehend and inspire them to perform. And if you're not doing that, again, as we get older, we resist change. Well, guess what? I think it was Albert Einstein that said, true intellect is the ability to change. You see people that are high in curiosity, well into their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. They continue to evolve. I just had today a guy named Larry Connor. He doesn't like to be called it, but he's a billionaire. And he does all these what people think would be crazy things, but he seeks challenges, not danger. And he just jumped out of a hot air balloon from 38,000. He's been to space. He's been to the bottom of the Marianas Trench. And he's so high in curiosity. It's what drives him to accept these challenges, because he knows he pushes outside, again, his comfort zones, and he continues to evolve into his 70s.
That's amazing. And I will say for working with younger people, they want to learn, they want to grow, they want to get better. And, we just need to have a little bit of patience. I always say when God was giving out patience, I was not in that line. So I had to work on becoming a patient leader and learning that development takes time. And so when I have people, I have people in my company that have been with me for 10 years, and I've taken them from, being 24 years old to now they're 35 years old and they're parents. And it's a beautiful thing to see. What can you speak on in terms of business for us to know that development of people takes time? And you as a leader have to have a warrior mindset so that you can actually help to lead the people in your business, as opposed to microwaving them, just getting rid of them, replacing them, because that's what's going on right now. A lot of people in business are not actually plugging into their people. We're thinking like, well, AI is going to replace you. We're just going to out recruit you. But that's not good for business. That's not good for the customers. What do you have to say on that for us to succeed by plugging in and developing people?
So I think the military does a good job of taking, and we're not saying we don't want people to be authentic in themselves. We do. Willie Nelson said, let people be people. It's their greatest strength. But they replace a certain part of your DNA with this team aspect. I love success when I'm surrounded by a team. I don't like individual accomplishments. And if I've, suffered any success, not suffered, but achieved any success, it is driven by the people. Everything, every profession, every industry, every endeavor is all about the people. I think business has gotten away from a playbook that made a lot of companies who they are. Johnson & Johnson, in my opinion, still does this the best. They have a human performance program. They pour into their people. We were driven by a mantra, mission first. We are going to get the job done. People always. People are critical to your success. And one of the first things we see is that during hard economic times, what do you think companies cut? Leadership development.
Oh, wow.
And it's insane. Actually, during the hard times, that's when, if you double down on leadership development, and you're truthful with your people, say, hey, these are hard times. What we do right now, is going to be the greatest mentor we have in life, is how we thrive through these hard times and what we learn about each other. But I mean, companies, they're just not good at this piece. Now you have to understand the military. Are we the most tactically, proficient military in the world? Arguably, possibly not. But we produce leaders per capita, more so per capita than the private sector does. Why? Because it is a progressive, sequential series of training events to reinforce leadership in everything we do. What we need business leaders, and when I come into businesses through Talent War Group, is we tell them everything is a leadership opportunity. If you take the time to mentor your people when they fail in a positive, professional, and tactful way, with nothing but love. And when I talk about leadership, I talk about how people ask me, how do I lead on the battlefield? It's simple. I led through love. I loved my men and women a lot more than I hated the enemy. And the highest form of compassion is accountability. And, you can't lower your standards. Your job is to take the people that you get into the organization and on day one, slowly, sequentially, progressively move them to the standard that you expect, and then maintain accountability in a positive, professional, and tactful manner. And part of that is explaining the culture of your organization, that it's a culture of accountability. And the reason you're doing that is to make the next generation, you, the young workers, better than we were. Simple as that.
And that's how growth happens, because businesses, they need to have growth. They need to show growth. And what I've learned is that there is an element of time. And if you are not respecting the time, you might be manipulating things to get the growth. And then you're going to have a cliff. And that's why you have these huge companies and they just fall and collapse. So,
business leaders, there are some out there that view people as numbers. You've got to get rid of that. You've got to have some empathy, kindness, and respect, because, people say, well, war is a business of life and death. Traditional business is life and death. It's the mechanism through which people pay to put food on their table, a roof over their head, to feed their families, to educate their families. It's a serious business, and people matter. And, I had one leader on the phone, he was wanting to bring us in, and he kept referring to most of his employees as hourlies. Oh, the hourlies. I'm like, hey, just a suggestion. I know we're trying to build a relationship here. I wouldn't call them your hourlies. They're your people, whether they're on an hourly income or if they're on a annual income. You need to start looking at your people different, because quite frankly, you can't do this alone, and you're going to need them to build your business and achieve the growth that you want. And I think that hit him a little hard. And we ended up doing a contract with him, and I think we changed that culture just a little bit. But when you get rid of people, this is still the hardest thing I'm dealing with. Is, recently had a separation of partnerships, and it was amicable, but that hits me hard when I'm looking internally saying, what could I have done differently? Was I a good partner? Did I communicate? Did I build the relationship? And for some leaders who just lack empathy and are maybe a little narcissistic, it's just, you fire and forget. I don't fire and forget. It hits me hard of, where did I fail to build that relationship? Or if they were an employee, one of my future leaders, how did I fail to develop them to the point where I could have kept them in the company?
Yeah, I love that. You talk about what it takes to be a great leader. When I was researching you, what would you say is something that is like hands down, you're a bad leader? Like you have to completely transform as an individual. What would you say is something that you've seen in your career that is just horrifying, and this is bad leadership?
So, when I was a young corporal in the Marine Corps, lieutenant colonel, the Marine Corps, much like the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, Space Force is so new and awkward to me. I'm sure they've got a set of principles as well, but there's these 12 leadership principles for the Marine Corps, and you had to know them at the time and rattle them off. And I rattled them off because the lieutenant colonel asked, and he said, Mike, here's what I need you to understand. If you forget all those principles, just don't forget the one. And it's one of the Marine Corps principles: set the example. He said, this is the golden rule in life, not only leading your Marines, but also leading your family and your kids. People will be what people can see. I'll say that again. People will be what people can see. And right now, there's some very worrisome societal trends. And especially we see it within our political leaders, where we expect leadership to be the best. The National Capital Region, Washington, D.C., we often see the opposite. It's rules for thee, not for me. And the example I use is like Gavin Newsom for California. And I'm a Californian, born and raised. I live in Texas now, as you can see in the background. During COVID, he mandated everyone wears a mask. And then 1 week after that, where was he? At a Michelin star restaurant in Napa Valley, elbow to elbow with his buddies. Nobody had masks. They're drinking wine. They're having their, $1,000 meal. There's no worse display when you cannot set the example for your people. Do as you say, because if you say one thing and your people do the other, you've just reinforced a culture of our values don't really matter. And I don't need to adhere to certain behaviors. So the worst leaders were the ones, and the military has a share of some of the best leadership I've ever seen in the military, or some of the best leadership I've ever seen was in the military. Some of the worst leadership I've ever seen was in the military. And remember, it's a leadership curriculum. And for some people, it just falls short. But we're the ones that preached a good game and they did the opposite. And it seems like we're in a culture where everyone has a microphone. A lot of these motivational guys, which I don't consider myself in the motivational game, as you can see with my tone, I'm not that much of a motivational guy. I go the slow and steady route of, hey, I'm going to do what I say and help hold myself accountable in front of my people. And if I make a mistake, I'm going to be the first one to say, hey guys, I screwed up and this is what happened. This is what I was thinking. It didn't work. The outcomes were not what I expected. And so please don't prevent yourself from making the same mistake if you end up in this situation. So for the parents out there, for the business leaders, I don't care what you do, you've got to set the example. You've got to live your values and you've got to show people that you're doing it.
Yeah. In your book, you talk about, doing what is hard. And I think a lot of people, they shy away from this, and it's just so easy today to get comfortable, to choose what's easy. There's so many ways to hide. What is the significance of doing what is hard, and how does that then flow into leadership? I think that's really profound, because when you do what's hard, I always tell this to my team, like, I can command versus demand from you because it's coming from within me. Like, I did it myself. I did the hard thing. So now I'm going to command that you do the hard thing too. Can you speak on this for people where this is like a warrior mentality to me. Like, there's such an honor in living this way that is the greatest gift to give to yourself when you have these values and principles. And when people get to the end of their life and they're like, I'm not happy with myself, I'm not fulfilled, maybe it's all those decisions you made along the way that didn't come from doing what is hard and right. Can you speak on that, especially for the audience that are like go-getters, high achievers, just to really set that tone, like doing what is right is always the best thing to do?
Well, you just said something that's, I think we should all be concerned about our legacy. Not necessarily what people will say, but you want people to be like, he was a good dude. He was dependable. He was reliable. He stayed to his word. But on my deathbed, I'm worried. And I think everyone it's just inevitable. It's human nature. You're going to have some regret to how you handled certain relationships, that you didn't take certain opportunities. But I want to be able to look back and say, hey, you didn't get everything right, but you did okay, kid. It's your time. That phrase I used earlier, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. People seek comfort, and you've got to fight that. It's a disease. You've got to get out of your comfort zone to continue growing and learning. And so this mantra of do hard things, we created a company called Legacy Expeditions, where we do extreme skydiving expeditions. We went to Everest, skydived into Everest. We did something that people said could never be done. Wow. Jump all 7 continents in 7 days. We actually had the famed filmmaker, Dan Myrick, the Blair Witch guy, which broke every record and still holds them in the indie industry. He followed us, and the documentary should come out shortly. And we did it for a good purpose. We were raising for Folds of Honor, which is an amazing organization that gives 91 cents of every dollar raised to educational scholarships for spouses and children of deceased, disabled veterans and first responders. But we also jumped onto every continent for a fallen service member. But we were told, Mike, don't try to do this. Multiple people have tried and they've failed. It's been a decade-long sort of lore that you could do it. And we took 18 months. And, you know, I've got to be honest, my businesses started to flail a little, because for 18 months I was focused on the planning and preparation and fundraising to pull this off. But when people say impossible, I hear improbable. And I am so proud to say that the thing that made special operations unique was you had 20, 40, 60, 80 people with this no quit attitude that if you told us it can't be done, we're like, give us a month. We'll show you it can. But 18 months, we pulled it off. Flying commercial too. We couldn't get a private jet, which would have made it a lot easier and probably a lot more comfortable. We did it in 6 days, 6 hours and 6 minutes, and it was hard. It was extremely hard. And I don't care about the world records. I remember in Australia when we did the last jump and set the records, somebody looked at me and all the guys from the group were having a beer, which we were so sleep deprived. It took one beer to get everyone drunk, which was pretty funny. And I said, that's what it's about, is that team effort. We did something that people said was impossible. We've learned. Guys are giving keynote speeches on 777 now. An amazing guy, Glenn Cowan, who was the lone Canadian of the group, a former special operator from Canada, now a venture capitalist, is giving a speech on everything he learned from 777. It's profound, the amount of lessons we learn from doing those hard things. And that's how you grow, bottom line. And I know, and you know, I'm trying to judge people less. I know it's so hard when you're a mother or father of four, you're holding a job, to say, hey kids, your mom and I are taking a day. We're going to go climb some mountain. We're going to do something hard. We're going to go kayak a river. Your grandparents are going to watch you, but getting yourself out of that day-to-day rut or grind to go do something challenging. And it is a breath of fresh air when you complete something, even if you fall short. If you can stand up, dust yourself off and be like, hey, we didn't get it done, but damn, we gave it a good, honest attempt and we learned a ton from it.
Yeah, you gave a great example in your book of the female Army Ranger, I believe, that, you know, when she was confronted with, should I do this or not? And everyone was giving her that hard time of like, how are you going to leave your family? And then she sat there and said, that's exactly why I'm going to do this. And I love that. I love that. A lot of, I think, women deal with that issue with kids. And for me, I have 3 small kids, and that's the reason why I push harder. Like, they don't make me do less, they make me do more, so that I can come from this place of, let me set an example for you. So I love hearing those stories. For you, Mike, I really wanted to talk about something on a spiritual level, because when I see your spirit, that's like when I'm able to do the research on a person and then you get to meet them, like, to me, this is a blessing. So I want to say thank you for taking the time. But I can feel the person's spirit, and you have a phenomenal spirit. And I think when you're thinking about the whole self, and for people to have like a great life, you know, there's going to be times where you're pushing more on the physical side. There's going to be times where you're pushing more on the health side. And there, you know, throughout that, I just believe that if you're spiritually void, you're going to fill that void with other things that are going to do more damage to you. So how do you maintain your spirit? You know, how do you maintain that side to keep yourself whole so that you're not jeopardizing all the things that you've worked so hard? Do you have people that keep you grounded? Like, what is it that keeps you spiritually in check?
You nailed it. One, my mom, who used to send me these cards when I was in the Marine Corps overseas, you know, a Nelson Mandela quote. And then now my wife, Jordan, who is a warrior to the definition, never served in the military, and somebody I would never want to cross.
Yeah, I love that.
But, you know, they keep me grounded. And when they see me pushing too hard, They give me the cautionary tale, like, hey, breathe, you need to take a few moments. This is something I've had to work on immensely, and I still have a lot of work to do. One, working on my empathy. There's something about the military where, especially combat, your empathy starts to lower. And also, I have something that keeps me grounded, maybe unique to me and vets of war, is survivor's guilt. That why did I come home, and what could I have done differently to make sure that we brought more guys home? And so that is like a backpack on my back, and it's filled with stones. And I still work. I still have mentors like Dr. Chris Free, who wrote the book, has helped me. You've got to find a way to make those stones. They're not saying take the backpack off, because I am grateful that I was a part of their lives. But how do you make those stones just a little bit smaller and a little more bearable? And so my spirituality is very much tied to the men we lost. And how do I live now in a way that keeps their legacy alive and does not dismiss the sacrifice they made for me and the others to come home? And I'm sorry to take it a direction very, very military, but my relationship with God has increased, because there was a time where I basically gave the middle finger to God after I lost, in a very intimate way, one of my teammates, who jumped on a grenade 3 feet from me to save my life and 2 other SEALs' lives. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, and that one sticks with me every day. But understanding his design, and that it's okay for me to question it, but ultimately he's got a plan, and that requires me to put in the work, both personally and for those around me, to make sure that I am a foundation for them to assist them and help others. At the end of the day, I'm driven by a mantra. It's not about me. And I told my wife this. I just bought my own first new car. She's like, "You've earned it. You're on the road, 300 days out of the year. I'm so happy." And I looked at her and I'm like, it's not about me. It's about you and my kids, and making sure, because this is going to be a big part of when my moment comes, is spiritually I can say, I've left them a foundation. I've poured into them. They're going to be okay. And I know that's driving me and getting a little more vulnerable than I usually get. But people overlook the spirituality, and that doesn't necessarily need to be God. That could be nature for some people. It could be art. It's void of religion. For me, I came from a Catholic family. It's God and it's nature. Those are the two things where I find I reflect on my spirituality the most.
Yeah. I think as human beings, we are designed to seek more. And so like we do have this natural thing inside of us to say, like, what is there more outside of ourselves? And that's something that we should like dive into. And I think that's a beautiful spirit that you have. One of the best quotes to like wrap everything up in your book, I love this. It says, "A man who has nothing for which he is willing to fight, nothing which is more important than his own personal safety, is a miserable creature and has no chance of being free unless made and kept so by the exertions of better men than himself." When I heard that story of Michael Mansour and how you were one of the SEALs that was on that roof with him, like, it just makes me know that your life has a special purpose, because someone exerted their life so that you could be here in this moment. And I think what you're doing is incredible. And I think what I feel when I speak to Navy SEALs, when I speak to people in the military, is just this deep sense of service. And I get to exist and be who I am because of you. So thank you for that. And I would love to hear, like, what can we do if we haven't served in the military to be of better service to other citizens of this great country? Because that's what I think about all the time. I do very well in business. I think this is why I do the podcast, because people are always like, "Can you mentor me?" And I'm like, "No, I don't want to mentor you." But I'll do a podcast and because I read so much. Let me show you who I like to read from and learn from. That's my way. But what can you teach us about, like, how can we add more service and become better citizens of this great country?
Yes, God bless our veterans, especially the ones who gave their tomorrow for our today.
Right.
Didn't come home. We mentioned it earlier, the transition out of the military, it sucks. It sucks because the civilian sector has a wildly different culture, both good and bad, than the military. Again, both good and bad. But you said it earlier, patience. If you can grab a hold of a veteran who's trying to figure out what their new passion and purpose is and provide a little mentorship and support, that goes a long way. If we had more Americans like you that just said, hey, I'm going to help this one veteran out. And there's not, comparatively, we're talking about the 1% of the population. If people were there to help support them beyond their families, let me give you, and when I exited the military, somebody early on told me, don't seek guidance from other vets who only have, 5-10 years in the work industry. Go find somebody that never served in the military that's been wildly successful, because they're the seasoned soldiers in this new industry. And I've made a concerted effort to seek out people who never served, who've given me their time. And for vets, you've got to actually go out and choose who your mentors are. And you've got to ask. And one of the hardest things for, I think, a lot of human beings is to say, hey, I respect what you've done. I need a little help. Can you give me some of your time? And then listen. And some of the advice is not going to be what you want to hear, but they're trying to set you up for success. So we need more business leaders, civilians, just almost adopting a veteran and saying, hey, let me help you in whatever ways I can to make this more of a seamless transition from one culture to the next. And Sabrina, I thank you for asking that question, and humbled to have been invited on this podcast. I hope to meet you in person one day as well.
Yeah, I would love that. I think that in what you do, the spirit that you carry, like, may God bless you, God bless your family. And where can people find out more about, where you are, what you do, how can they connect with you? And for sure, everyone grab this book. This is also like the other book that you had, the talent war.
Yes.
That book is amazing for business. This is so good if you're not in business and you're just an everyday person and you want to say, how do I cultivate a warrior mindset? This is a great thing. And it's a great thing to leave beside your bed. Just pick it up first thing in the morning, read some of this, and then start your day. Like, prime yourself to be a warrior, because you will get attacked and you have to have that mindset to be able to persist. But where can people find you so they can learn more about you?
So this is the worst part of my job, and something I've got a website now. People said, if you don't play the game, you're going to miss out. So MikeSarraille.com, or contact us at Talent War Group. And yeah, I'm trying to maintain some semblance of humility and modesty. But, what I'm learning is, we're all in sales, and you got to sell yourself, because ultimately, we bring business in that keeps my people employed. But yeah, MikeSarraille.com, or you can find me on socials. Very easy. Reach out if you got a question. I try to answer every message I can. And if somebody has the time to give me or send me a question, I better have the time to give them a response.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I know people are going to learn a lot, and then we can just keep cultivating this mindset, because it's something that we have to continuously pour into, or it will leave us. So thank you. Thank you.